And thanks to you at home for staying with us for the next hour. I'm a little hoarse. I have a little cold, but I hope that you will stick with me as if I were not just any little horse, but rather your favorite little pony. There's a lot to get to in the show tonight. This was a news day that had a lot going on. We led the show last night with news of a crime in Colorado. News of the murder of the corrections chief in that state. He was shot dead in his home just hours before the Colorado governor signed into law that state's historic new gun reform legislation. There's new information tonight about the investigation into that killing of the state's prisons chief. We're going to have those details coming up just ahead. On President Obama's trip to Israel, today was Big Speech Day. It was highly anticipated. It was very warmly received, particularly the part where he went off script and surprised everyone. We're going to have details on that coming up as well. In Washington tonight, the Congress packed up and went home. They are taking 2 weeks off as of tonight. Nice work if you can get it, right? But before they left, they passed a spending bill that will avoid the threat of a government shutdown next week. Not shutting down the whole federal government used to be the kind of thing you could just reasonably expect from your Congress. It's the kind of thing they just get done as a matter of course. But under House Speaker John Boehner, not shutting down the government has become kind of a notable achievement for this Congress. So mazel tov on that. It's a low bar. House Republicans also voted today, again, for the Paul Ryan budget. And, of course, Democrats are very excited about that because they plan to use that vote against Republicans in campaign ads for the next election. We've got the one and only Ezra Klein here momentarily to help sort out what is important about what they just voted on in Congress and whether we just avoided another one of the cliffs/ceilings/crises that Congress now schedules for us every few weeks, and whether the way they avoided this next one is itself important. So there's a lot going on in the news. We've got a lot ahead. But we begin tonight with late-breaking and rather surprising news from the Democratic leader in the Senate, Senator Harry Reid. Following 2 days of angry response from California Senator Dianne Feinstein, she had been very publicly disappointed and angry that Harry Reid was not going to move her assault weapons ban to the Senate floor as part of the Democrats' gun reform package. After 2 days of defiant reaction to that decision from Senator Feinstein and from supporters of gun reform, after Vice President Biden today made a joint appearance with New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg demanding that the assault weapons ban get a vote, saying that neither he nor the president will rest until these measures are pursued. Tonight, Senator Harry Reid responded. He put out a statement saying, quote, "I will ensure that a ban on assault weapons and limits on high-capacity magazines receive votes." He also announced that he would start the process of moving gun reform legislation to the floor of the Senate as of tonight. Now, the exact contours of the bill are still uncertain, including the question of what's going to end up in the base bill and what's going to get acted on in the form of amendments, and when the actual voting is going to begin, given that he started the process tonight. But the statement from Harry Reid tonight was very clear on one policy change in particular. He said, quote, "Any bill that passes the Senate must include background checks." Now, universal background checks for gun buyers are not only among the most popular proposed gun reforms in the country. With over 90% support in many national polls, background checks for people buying guns are among the most popular policies of any kind in the country, gun-related or not. It is remarkable to think that something with 91%, 92% popular support might be too controversial to get any Republican senators' votes, but right now it is still an open question as to whether Republicans will vote for it. And then if it does pass the Senate, if it passes the Senate, there, of course, is the question of whether it can pass the House. The House, of course, is controlled by Republicans. Do Republicans in the House support universal background checks the way that 91% of the country does? Do House Republicans support background checks? Maybe. Sort of. At least for a second, it seemed like they did.
Do you think background checks and improving background checks might be part of that?
They should actually do a real background check on everyone.
Holy cow. OMG, right? That is the position held by 91%, 92% of the country. So it shouldn't be that remarkable. But learning that the Republican Speaker of the House is in favor of doing a real background check on everyone, as he said, I mean, that seems like news, right? That seems like a breakthrough. That would mean that if it does pass the Senate, when it gets to the House under John Boehner, it might pass. We might get real background checks for everyone who's buying a gun. That's what he said he favors, right? A real background check on everyone. Except right after he said that, then he said that's not really what he favors.
Now, what the speaker meant by that, I should say, because I had to go back to his office and say, is he coming out in favor of an improved background check system? No.
No. So, yeah, that is what he said, but that's not what he wants to have said. So he maybe forgot for a second there what his actual policy position is supposed to be on this issue. His office had to clarify that what he said when he said he wants background checks is not actually what he believes. That's not the policy he supports, even though he said he did. And, you know, John Boehner is not alone in having this specific kind of problem in public. You might have also seen today that the Republican governor of Ohio just came out in favor of civil unions for gay people. He did do that. He said he was in favor of civil unions for gay people. But just as Republican House Speaker John Boehner came out in favor of background checks for a second and then he had to take it back, today when Ohio Republican Governor John Kasich came out in favor of civil unions, it was also only for a second, and then he took it back.
You know, if people want to have civil unions and have some way to transfer their resources, I'm for that. I just think marriage is between a man and a woman. But if you want to have a civil union, that's fine with me.
If you want to have a civil union, that's fine with me. That's the ABC affiliate in Cleveland, Ohio, interviewing John Kasich about his views on gay rights. This is a very relevant issue in Ohio Republican politics right now because Ohio Republican Senator Rob Portman just changed his position to be in favor of gay marriage now because he has a gay son. Well, Governor John Kasich told this interviewer today that he has talked to Senator Portman about the issue. He does not share Senator Portman's view that gay people ought to have equal marriage rights, but he said, clear as day there, he is fine with civil unions. Except, apparently, he is not actually fine with civil unions. He forgot. He's actually against them. His office later followed up with a written statement to reporters that said the governor did not actually mean it when he said that about civil unions. Quote, he may have used the term civil union loosely in this instance. Quote, the governor's position is unchanged. He opposes gay marriage and opposes changing Ohio's constitution to allow for civil unions. Ohio Republicans banned civil unions for gay people in 2004, and John Kasich supports that ban. When he said today, quote, if you want to have a civil union, that's fine with me, he did not mean it. He forgot that he doesn't actually believe that. So his office had to clean it up and remind him that he is actually way more anti-gay than he thinks he is. They had to take back his statement. This happens in Republican politics a lot. I mean, remember in the presidential campaign, this used to happen to Mitt Romney all the time. The worst one was probably that CBS interview he did with Scott Pelley.
My position has been clear throughout this campaign. I'm in favor of abortion being legal in the case of rape and incest and the health and life of the mother.
Rape and incest and the health and life of the mother. Except that's not supposed to be his position. He forgot what his actual position was. And then his campaign had to clean it up for him. This was just amazing. Look at this. The Romney campaign will not say that the candidate misspoke, but a spokeswoman does say he does not actually support an exception for the health of the woman. So Mr. Romney did not misspeak. He just speaked something that missed what he actually meant. It was also the time when the Blunt Amendment came up at a town hall debate, and Mr. Romney was publicly horrified by the whole idea of it.
I don't believe employers should tell someone whether they could have contraceptive care or not.
At the time, it seemed like quite a relief, right? All these other Republicans support it. But Mitt Romney does not support the Blunt Amendment that would let your employer decide whether or not you can get contraceptives. Problem is, he forgot. He actually does support the Blunt Amendment. He just couldn't remember that that was supposed to be his position.
Of course I support the Blunt Amendment.
Right. Don't forget. Reminds me of the Pink Panther remake where Steve Martin says, he is not pushing up daisies. He's dead. Your employer deciding whether or not you can get contraceptives. That is the Blunt Amendment. It's terrible, right? Yeah, it turns out that's what you support. Sounds awful when you put it that way, doesn't it? Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky is right in the middle of one of these screw-ups himself right now. Senator Paul wants to be seen as a libertarian, but he also wants to be taken seriously in Republican politics. And Republican politics are rather extremely anti-abortion right now. So Rand Paul wants to be seen as a small government guy, but he also wants a government that is big enough to monitor every single pregnancy in the country, to force all American women into the government's chosen outcome for their pregnancy. You do not get to decide about your pregnancy. The government gets to decide. Rand Paul has introduced so-called personhood legislation that would ban all abortions in America, federally. It would also likely ban some forms of hormonal birth control, like the pill, and even in vitro fertilization. So again, under his bill, you would have no choice, no exceptions. You get no say. It's the government that decides. Rand Paul's going to decide for you. But then, when Rand Paul was asked about that policy of his this week in an interview, he reacted by saying essentially, that sounds horrible. I don't believe that. Yes, Senator, yes, actually you do.
So just to be precise, if you believe life begins at conception, which I suspect you do believe that, you would have no exceptions for rape, incest, the life of the mother. Is that right?
Well, I think that once again puts things in too small of a box. What I would say is that there are thousands of exceptions. There are a lot of decisions that are made privately by families and their doctors that really the law won't apply to.
Well, it sounds like you believe in some exceptions.
Well, there's going to be, like I say, thousands of extraneous situations where the life of the mother is involved and other things that are involved. So I would say that each individual case would have to be addressed.
Each individual case decided privately by families and their doctors, instead of a government-imposed policy that gives you no choice in the matter and that doesn't take into account your individual circumstances. You know, people who support that are called pro-choice. That's what most Americans believe. You, Senator, you, on the other hand, your policy is the opposite of that. Did you forget? I know it sounds awful, but it is what you are doing. It's what all of you guys are doing. Rand Paul, you are for banning abortion without exceptions federally. Mitt Romney, you're for the Blunt Amendment. John Kasich, you're actually against civil unions. John Boehner, you don't want background checks for gun buyers, after all, even though none of you really seem to believe that that's what you're supposed to believe. Why does this happen so much in Republican politics? And how does the other party, or the country at large, argue policy with a party that so often does not even seem to know what their policy positions are, let alone actually believe in them? Joining us now is Ezra Klein, the leader of the excellent Wonk blog at The Washington Post and an MSNBC policy analyst. Ezra, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here.
It's good to see you, Rachel.
Well, occasionally Republicans do not just talk about policy and get confused therein. Occasionally they make policy, which is the case with the big spending bill to avert a government shutdown that they left for the president to sign today. Is there something evident in the policies that they do enact that shows that they do understand those policies and believe in them more than this other stuff that they seem to not even really understand?
There are a couple of constants. Lower taxes on rich people. Not lower taxes for everybody, right? They don't like taxes, but letting the payroll tax cut expire was in fact their policy. But lower taxes in general, lower tax rates in particular on richer, wealthier Americans. Cutting social programs. Entitlements they go back and forth on, though. Medicare in particular, they go back and forth. You'll remember that Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan ran in the election as they were going to stop the Democrats' terrible intention to cut Medicare. Then Paul Ryan got back into the House and was back to writing a budget in which he kept all those cuts, added some new ones, and, of course, in the long run had more and more of them added into his voucherization program. But what actually I think has been the real shock to me in recent weeks, or the real frustration trying to cover these budget debates, is Republicans articulate 5 goals on these issues. They say they want to cut the deficit. They say they want to cut social spending, primarily entitlement spending. They say they want to protect defense spending. They say they want to simplify the tax code and to lower tax rates. In a deal with President Obama, they could get the first 4 of those things. They could get more deficit reduction. They could protect defense. The Democratic president would give them some cover in cutting Medicare and Social Security, and they could simplify the tax code by taking out expenditures. They're now saying they want none of that. They want none of those things, and they're also not going to get the tax rates, and they're just going to keep the sequester and so not have a deal. And I've asked a lot of them to walk me through the reasoning here, and I honestly have just never come to an answer that I understand even a little bit.
Does that mean that they're just post-policy, that the policy actually, even some of the things that seem like constants, don't actually matter to them, that it's pure politics, it's just positioning themselves vis-a-vis the president, and they're not actually invested in any particular outcome for the country?
I would like to have an answer where that isn't true. I really would. And I try I've been trying to find it, and I'm sure part of it is just that I'm not smart enough to do so, that I've not found the right people or spoken to them. But it is hard to come up with one. And we can go back a bit. I mean, earlier today, of course, Michelle Bachmann was on the floor of the House saying Obamacare is going to kill women and children and seniors. The individual mandate, which has become, in many Republican quarters, the central problem with the bill, the real assault on the Constitution, was, of course, created by Republicans, the Heritage Foundation in '89, brought in the Senate Republican alternative to Bill Clinton, passed in Massachusetts by Mitt Romney, endorsed by Jim DeMint when he endorsed Mitt Romney in 2008. Then as soon as President Obama took it up, they all turned on it like that. The power that where the president has in deciding where Republicans will be that next day, that next week, that next month is enormous and deeply depressing.
And I feel like looking at some of the sort of Freudian slips on some of these more social policies or policies that aren't as central to their agenda in Washington is actually an important window into them not really being invested in policy at all. I feel like if the Republican Party is going to really reinvent itself, messaging isn't the key part of it. It has to be about being rooted in policy ideas for the country. Ezra Klein of the Washington Post Wonk blog, MSNBC policy analyst. Ezra, it is always great to have you here. Thank you.
Great to see you. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. President Obama gave a big, very highly anticipated speech in Jerusalem today. While he was in Jerusalem, he got a major award. The way the American news media covered that moment will be the most amazing picture you see today. And that is next.